Welcome back to Wolverine Confidential, your Michigan sports podcast. I'm Zink, a producer here at MLive.
I'm Aaron McMann, Michigan football beat writer here at MLive.
And I'm Andrew Kahn, Michigan basketball beat writer.
All right, guys, we want to jump right into it. After a long and snowy weekend, we may have gotten stuck. I know I was stuck at my condo. What happened to you this weekend?
I got to Madison fine. The night before, no problems. Leaving after the game was a problem. I ended up going out of Milwaukee. Delta did not tell me my flight was canceled, really ever. They just rebooked me on a new flight the next day, which I wasn't happy about. They will be getting a strongly worded letter from this MLive writer. And
I'm a Delta fan, by the way. Delta is my airline. I will defend it to this day.
It is. I mean,
I like United because I like to fist fight.
Delta's my number one as well, but you got to keep them. You got to keep them on their toes. Exactly. So yeah, but they paid for my cab to Milwaukee. Pleasant ride.
Take the back roads, little Wisconsin detour.
Sure. Got some work done. Got closed my eyes for a little bit.
Yeah, there you go.
And made it home.
So guys, let's open this up with basketball. Considering you were just in Wisconsin, Michigan got out to a big lead, and then a little bit of a comeback by Wisconsin. But fans probably like what they saw.
Yeah.
What's your takeaway?
This was an impressive win. I mean, Wisconsin is not great this year. All this talk about Michigan struggles at the Kohl Center. Part of it is the atmosphere there, sure, but part of it is that Wisconsin has had a really, really good team over the last 15 years or so.
Right.
So Michigan was often the underdog going in there, but yesterday they were not.
Right.
And they got it done. They got out to a hot start. Yes, they did.
Going in there, they're thinking we're going to win this game.
Sure, and they'd had trouble getting off to good starts, but that was not a problem Sunday. The shots were falling from everywhere early and often, and like you said, they built that huge lead, 44-22 by half.
And so we had Duncan Robinson filling in for Isaiah Livers out with the injury.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think he played?
He played very well.
Yeah.
This was the Duncan Robinson that Michigan needs. He's sort of a barometer for this team. I'll be digging into that a little bit later on MLive.com. But if you look at his stats, when he plays well, makes shots, scores points, Michigan wins. I mean, it's a pretty easy correlation there. And that's what he did. He hit 4 threes, 16 points total. I mean, Beilein said after the game he wanted him to shoot a little more. He could have made 7 or 8 if he had been a little more trigger happy there in the second half. But yeah, he filled in for Livers, who sprained his ankle Tuesday early in the Northwestern game and was not able to go. Beilein said he practiced a little bit, but he just wasn't feeling so well. Day of the game in the walkthrough, and from what I saw. I'm not going to try to play doctor here, and I feel like when a lot of people say that, that's exactly what they do.
Yeah.
But I won't. I'll just tell you what I saw, which was him, limping and not looking comfortable at all. So he was in his sweats, and that's that. Beilein says ankles are tricky, and they can linger, and they don't want it to linger, so they weren't going to push him. But no word on whether he'll be ready for Wednesday against Iowa.
So he's getting there, and we'll be back, obviously, before the end of the season, before tournament time.
Probably smart to hold him down now, like you said, as opposed to once you get closer to tournament time where it could become a problem, you may not have him. So it's probably a smart move from Beilein and the coaching staff just to play it safe, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a spot on the roster where, his backup was a starter earlier in the season, has been a starter for, chunks of his career, and is a very productive player and, a redshirt senior, Duncan Robinson. So, it does hurt the depth a little bit, but that's why you saw some interesting lineup combinations on Sunday. I thought, despite it only being for 3 minutes, I thought it was kind of a big deal that Mo Wagner and John Teske played together.
Hadn't seen that often, if at all,
ever. And it was like, something that Beilein's like asked about, and he's like, we're just not ready to do it, and then it just sort of happened. I thought Beilein's comment after the game was funny. So it was a scary few minutes, is what he said for him, because it's all about who you can guard,
Yeah. Right.
And the idea of Wagner kind of guarding a potential stretch 4 is kind of dicey. But Wisconsin's personnel is such that it worked out that you could kind of put him on a guy that wasn't much of a scoring threat. Let Teske guard Happ, and then have them both out there on offense was interesting. I mean, again, it was I think 4 defensive possessions, 3 offensive possessions. It was a pretty small sample size.
It's not like they're out there for 5-10 minutes and
right.
potentially giving up buckets and making John Beilein's decision making look poor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyone could argue that it is, but as we go forward and we're talking about getting guys back from injury, we got Iowa up next, then you got the big rematch with Ohio State, and then we're getting close to winding down from there on the season. What do you expect, or what does this team need in order to finish strong, maybe to even get up into that 6 seed range? Right now I know a lot of projections have them at about 8, some as low as 9, some as high as 6 or 7. Where do you see this team ending up, and what needs to happen to get there?
Certainly got to protect home court against Iowa. That would be a bad loss. Michigan has, for the most part, avoided those this season.
Do they have room for any more bad losses?
I mean, as far as getting into the tournament, yes, I think that can happen, and it wouldn't cost them a bid necessarily. But seeding, which is important, would definitely be impacted. Ohio State, that'd be a very good win, but I think they should be actually small favorites in that game. And then you got 2 on the road to close out, which are both, kind of up in the air. I feel like they might. Penn State's playing well, so that should be interesting. And then, we'll see how it shakes out in the Big Ten tournament, who they might match up with. But there were encouraging signs on Sunday for sure with the shooting, and the defense remained strong. Again, Wisconsin is not a particularly strong team this year, but Ethan Happ is a great player.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you want to see where Wagner has come defensively and on the backboards from last season, just rewatch that game if you want.
Right.
It's strange to say, considering Happ got 29 points, but you needed 23 shots to get there.
Not the most efficient game we've seen.
Right, and several of those baskets were against Teskey. When Wagner was one-on-one with him, he really held his own, more than held his own.
Yeah. And so what do you think is going to be the best worst case scenario? We talked about seeding a little bit. So much can change. The Big Ten tournament, so much can happen. We saw that last year. No one expected a Michigan run. But what do you think is the best case for this team? And then we talked about potentially losing to Iowa, Penn State being tough. What's the worst case?
Yeah, it's you can't look at it really in a vacuum, because it obviously depends what all these other teams are doing around the country. But you figure Iowa. You figure worst case is 1-3 here down the stretch. I mean, losing all 4 it would be hard to believe. So you say you beat Iowa, but then lose to Ohio State in the 2 road games. Penn State and Maryland is the other one. And that could put you probably in that second day of the Big Ten tournament for sure. You lose that, now you're really you're on the bubble for sure. I think you get in, but you're sweating it out to some extent. Right. Best case is I think running the table, closing the regular season with 5 straight wins, which is very possible. Getting into that top 4.
Ohio State being the big roadblock, I imagine.
Mm-hmm. And then getting into the top 4 of the Big Ten, playing on that, getting the double bye, if you will,
right.
And seeing what happens there.
And so, do you expect not to predict too early, but they're going to play Ohio State before we're on air next.
Mm-hmm.
Do you expect that game to be a win?
I think it's going to be real close. I mean, I think Michigan got up to a 20-point lead, as many know, in that first game. Before things fell apart. I think defensively, Michigan is probably even better than they were then. So if the shots are falling, there's a chance for that win. I think it'll be a competitive game.
Yeah.
Free throw shooting has obviously been a big topic of discussion with this team. Where is that among John Beilein's concerns at this point?
It's up there for sure. I asked him about Xavier Simpson after yesterday's game, and he basically said, he wants him out on the floor at the end of games because of all the other things he does well, right. Defensively and ball handling, things we talked about in the last podcast on Thursday. But if he's not going to make his foul shots, he's not going to be in there. So he got the chance. Beilein really wants him to make one in one of these games and just kind of prove to himself that he can do it. Because what he does in practice doesn't really matter at this point. He's got to do it in a game. So he missed, he came out. And
how many tournament games, Big Ten tournament, and NCAA tournament, games come down to, we've all seen in March Madness, either that buzzer beater at the end or free throw shooting, and more often than not, the buzzer beaters stick in our minds. But it comes down to free throw shooting in a lot of these really close games, which are really good matchups, and that has to be a huge concern because he is, Simpson's your best ball handler, so you want to get him the ball, at the end of the game. But if he can't hit his free throws, it's got to be scary. You got to wonder how much is between his ears and how much is actual. You look at his stroke; he's got a nice stroke. It's not as if he has form issues. He seems to be working through. When you watched him in high school, he was still a good shooter then. I'm wondering, is something going to click, or is this the shooter at the line that you have?
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely between his ears. Now there is some mechanical things that they've worked on with him. The broadcasters during yesterday's game, I rewatched it. They mentioned he will bring the ball up and pause for a second, and it'll sometimes block his view of the basket for a moment, which is a problem. But they feel they've corrected that. So at this point it is just mental and actually doing it in the game. Right. So you're not dreading when you're going to the line. You want the ball because you've done it. You've been there before and you've made it.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see. This is a great 2 matchups this week. As we close out with basketball, we want to move on to football, touch on some things we wanted to talk about last week, didn't get the chance to. But first, that 10th assistant coach. The search is happening. Everyone has heard who's interviewed so far. You got Cam Cameron, Jim McElwain, a couple other people we were talking about before the show. You want to talk about some of these guys that could be Michigan's coveted 10th assistant?
Yeah, several names, like you mentioned, have popped up. For those maybe unfamiliar with the 10th coach, it's a new spot. The NCAA passed a rule, and it was effective as of January 9th, where programs could add a 10th on-field assistant coach to their coaching staff. So they're a legitimate member of the coaching staff.
This isn't just a recruiting
Correct.
analyst who's going to be behind the scenes.
They can help in practice. They can help with recruiting. It's another body on the coaching staff. Coaches are big-time programs like Michigan looked at this as adding another body that could help with recruiting, absolutely. But it's another person, another mouth in the staff. But several names have popped up. Jim McElwain has reportedly he's the front runner at this point, former head coach at Florida. Obviously there was an interesting interaction before this season because Michigan opened up against Florida. McElwain said some quote-unquote controversial comments about Harbaugh and him not releasing the roster and the depth chart and everything else. Right. So they've apparently put that to bed. He's reportedly interviewed. He's been here. Obviously, I think Harbaugh likes his head coaching experience. He has plenty of experience on the offensive side of the ball.
He was considered an offensive guru before he got to Florida.
Some folks consider him that. Yeah, that you can ask the Florida fan base. They may tell you something different. But absolutely, McElwain's been around for a long time. He's got a significant experience. He's a name I could totally see joining the staff. But there's several others, like you mentioned, Cam Cameron, the former offensive coordinator at LSU, another offensive mind that could, I think, fit with Harbaugh and fit within this coaching staff. Another name that's come up that really hasn't been talked about much, John Morton, former wide receivers coach of the New York Jets. He was fired in January. He was there for 1 year. He's got significant NFL experience, like a decade plus. He coached with Harbaugh in San Francisco. He knows the NFL game. He can develop guys. So I think he'd be a name that's been thrown out there. A name that popped up over the weekend, Brian Wright, the offensive coordinator at Toledo. Good mind. He was actually a finalist for Assistant Coach of the Year nationally. He was apparently in the running. He did take his name out, so he's no longer apparently up for the job.
Toledo's been a high-powered team.
They have.
In recent past, from what I understand.
Yeah, number one. I was looking at the numbers the other night. Number one total offense in the Mid-American Conference last year. They're always up near the top. I went to Central Michigan, so we're familiar with Toledo. Programs have always been good. They're always competing for a MAC title. So he's a name that could in theory fit here. He's got significant quarterback coaching experience, significant experience coordinating offenses. Now, keep in mind, from what we've been told, and this isn't confirmed at this point, but from what has been reported at this point, this coach is going to be the wide receivers coach. This is the spot left open by Dan Enos. Dan Enos joined the staff in early December as the wide receivers coach with the clause in his contract that he could, in theory, become a coordinator. That didn't happen. Then he bolted for Alabama, leaving a spot open here.
He came to Michigan just so that he could avoid some
yes.
contractual.
Yes, I love conspiracy theories. That was not, in fact, true. But all signs point to these folks being wide receivers coach. Now, some of these guys haven't had experience coaching with wide receivers in a while, which is fascinating. Now, Harbaugh was asked about this spot last week. Yep. He said, he made an interesting comment in that He basically said all the offensive coaches at this point, their titles are kind of up in the air. They're doing I think he said a self-scouting period at this point.
Right.
So they're going to look at each position, they're looking at each coach where they fit. That could mean a potential coaching change with somebody, a couple folks. That could mean, maybe the person that gets hired here, say it's a McElwain or a Cam Cameron, maybe they become the offensive coordinator. A lot of things are up in the air at this point, but it's going to depend a lot on who he ends up hiring.
And these 10 coaches, I mean, that's separate from the analyst
Correct.
staff, right?
I mean, we've had several of those hired as well. Interesting name from San Diego, Tanner Engstrand, who was another coach under Harbaugh. He was the offensive coordinator at San Diego, one of the highest regarded OCs in FCS. So you've got another name in there. You got a lot of folks behind the scenes. Harbaugh is really trying to beef up his staff.
Are these staffs too big, Aaron?
That's the question.
Too big? I know Michigan's not alone. I mean, a lot of the big
correct. Alabama,
schools have
USC,
these huge analysts.
Yeah.
Staffs
and Harbaugh's staff was actually a lot bigger if you go back in his first year here. I mean, he actually consolidated some of these positions, not necessarily
they talked about not wanting too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah,
sure.
And you can make the argument last year there were too many with the offense. You had basically 3 guys calling plays, running the offense,
right.
And so maybe this is the time for Harbaugh to step back and say, well, maybe we go with 2 guys. Maybe it's me and someone else as opposed to 3. Now, Pep Hamilton hasn't left. I know that was a name we were going to get into in a minute.
Yeah.
But there was some thought that maybe he'd leave. His name came up for the Oakland Raiders job, never left. So, and he's under contract. So
has the window passed? Well, we can get into that. But
yeah.
So we talk about too many cooks in the kitchen. We talk about 10 assistants. You talk about the self-reflection that's clearly going on at Michigan. I feel like this could be one of 2 things. This would be really good self-evaluation, and we all improve when we evaluate ourselves, right? At the same time, is this an indication of a little bit of chaos happening at Schembechler Hall and a concern for next season? Because, one thing you get, while there's tons of coaching turnover throughout the NCAA every year, there's the most successful programs tend to have a baseline level of consistency. Michigan has been the exact opposite of that for almost a decade now. Complete inconsistency. Is this another sign of inconsistency within the program that's going to, not bode well for the future?
I think it's a combination of both the things you brought up. I think Harbaugh, and he mentioned this last week, he realizes the offense isn't where they want it. It's not where the defense is. It's nowhere near as effective, I think, as Harbaugh wants it to be. So I think he's stepping back and looking at what he has here. Now, keep in mind, he's got 2 guys, well, 3 if you count Don Brown, but Don isn't going anywhere. But he's got two assistant coaches on the offensive side of the ball making $1 million a year plus. They're under contract.
You guys can throw me 5 whenever you want.
So you push them out the door, you still got to pay them. So I think Harbaugh looks at, in the program as a general, looks at that as investments. So he doesn't want to necessarily get rid of those guys. But at the same token, he realizes what they did last year didn't work. Like I mentioned before, they have 3 guys running the offense. It was unclear, and it still is unclear who actually is calling the plays. Harbaugh said he had final say. But, Pep Hamilton's there coordinating the quarterbacks in the passing game. You've got Tim Drevno obviously focused on the offensive line, but technically with the title of offensive coordinator, in theory, calling plays. So I think it was a mixed bag. Harbaugh, like you mentioned, I think they're stepping back, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see some changes here. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe you see Drevno. I don't want to theorize too often here, but Drevno he's coaching the offensive line. Maybe he takes on a greater, portion there with that, and maybe they see the plays of someone else. I don't know. Like I said, it's going to depend on, I think, who's hired here, and then you'll see the chips kind of fall where they do.
And I think one of the big questions is, when you're looking at that offense last year, it looked like the play calling was really bad. Was that play calling handicapped by the fact that the quarterbacks had about 1.5 seconds to throw? I mean, who could you put in there and they still wouldn't succeed? You could put J.T. Barrett, you could put Tom Brady in there. And I don't know that they're still getting accurate balls off in time. So that's what came first, the too many cooks in the kitchen and the play calling, or was it the offensive line where you had very limited amount of plays you could call? Speaking of the offensive line, Michigan has one in theory.
Yeah.
What are they going to do about that? I mean, you can't play football without winning the game in the trenches. It's a cliche, but there's a reason it's there. What's happening?
Here's the thing, and I've written about this on MLive, in the last few weeks. They've got guys there. The problem is it's the combination. They don't know where they're going to play, what they're going to do with them. For instance, you got Ben Bredesen. He started at left guard all last season. He's coming back. He, in theory, could start left guard. But then you've got question
Would
mark.
he kick out to tackle? I mean, he's got the size.
That's
right?
an option, and
Yeah.
that was brought up last year.
But we haven't seen him practicing there.
Haven't played. No, we haven't seen him much. Here's the thing: Michigan did a very good job going into last season of having their offensive linemen play 1, 2, sometimes 3 spots. So he'd probably be familiar playing there if he wanted to. I think he could. But that comes down to, I think, the other piece is what they have. And this is where it gets complicated. You know, you've got Cesar Ruiz back. He played all guard last season. He's inherently a center. He was recruited as a center. He was a top-ranked center.
4 years at IMG?
He was IMG.
Center almost all.
5-star recruit. He was recruited as a center. He probably will end up as a center, but is it going to be next year? Is it going to be a junior? We don't know. You've got Steven Spinellis, another guy who has significant experience, again, at center and guard. And then the tackle spots are, I think, the most, they're up in the air at this point.
Well, the interior of the line actually looks quite solid,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You got 3 big bodies that have extensive experience and are all highly rated recruits, and then you look towards the outside, which left tackle, right tackle, depending on if your quarterback's right or left hand. Most important, guys out there, arguably, and there's nothing. So, is there any hope? Calvin Anderson, Grant Newsome's return.
Yeah.
Is there a silver lining for Michigan fans, or is the doom and gloom going to continue?
I think if they can land Calvin Anderson, it would be big. It would shore up one of those 2 tackle spots. So in essence, they wouldn't have to worry about both. Because I think going into this season, the problem, and you hinted on it with the offensive line, is going to be the tackle spots. They're young, they're inexperienced, they're unsure of what they have there. They can get a Calvin Anderson. Again, this is a guy who's highly coveted. He's got Michigan, he's got Oklahoma, Auburn, TCU, right? Texas, all after him. Now he's identified Michigan and Texas as and he's called them his top tier at this point.
He's taking recruiting lingo and putting his own spin on it. I love it.
From all reports, this kid is highly intelligent. He speaks well. He interviews well. He seems to have this down to a T in terms of the marketing aspect of recruiting. Every time he goes on a recruit or on a recruiting trip, he tweets out. He gets the pictures with all the coaching staff. He thanks everyone. He's doing this the right way, which kudos to him, because you don't see this a lot of times with these recruits. But yeah, he's a 3-year starter at left tackle. Started 36 straight games at Rice. He's a 2-time honorable mention All-Conference USA tackle. So he's got experience. I think he would plug in right away at left tackle, and I think he would shore up a spot that Michigan, frankly, doesn't know what it's going to do with next year.
Well, you got to hope for Michigan's sake they can land him. Is there any update on Newsome's situation? I know he said that he could play right now, but he's got to wait for the doctors to clear him. As Andrew said, none of us are doctors.
No.
Maybe related to some, but we don't have too much insight. What do we got for Newsome, and do you think he could come back to top form?
That's the question. We spoke to him last week at Children's Hospital in Ann Arbor. He said he is going through conditioning with the team. No restrictions.
He's at full speed.
Full speed. He's conditioning. He's going through everything. They got a new conditioning coach in there and staff and everything else. But he hasn't been cleared to practice yet.
Now I got to ask you. So you saw him in person.
Mm-hmm.
When guys go through an injury like that and they're laid up for months and months, their bodies change a little bit. You saw him in person.
He looked good. I was just bringing that up. I was impressed with his physique. He did. I guess we didn't ask him how much he weighed, but he looked good. He looked in good tip-top shape.
Yeah.
He's in theory been working out since last fall. I can remember last September Jim Harbaugh tweeting on a photo of him running again. So he's been working out basically the whole season. There was a hope that he'd be cleared to practice by the end of last season by doctors. He apparently wasn't. But he said he's meeting with doctors again here in the next 6 weeks before spring practice gets started, and that's when the doctors are going to let him know what he can do. Now, if he's allowed to practice again, that's going to be interesting. The fact that Michigan's recruiting Calvin Anderson tells me they don't anticipate him being available, or if they do, him not being what he was a couple of years ago. Right. But at the same token, he's experienced. He looks good. He's a very smart, bright individual. So I think it would help with the offensive line. Whether he'd be able to make an immediate impact remains to be seen.
All right, guys, we're going to have to wrap it up here, but a lot in store for Michigan, both basketball and football. You guys have anything going on this week that I should know about?
Nothing. We're quiet in the football front. Now, keep an eye on the hire. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that happens this week. That's something but other than that, Michigan football is pretty quiet.
We might have something to talk about next week. Obviously, 2 big games this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Iowa, and then, as we said, senior day, final home game of the season. Hard to believe. Sunday against Ohio State. Sellout crowd. So yeah, we'll be all over that. And much like the football team, a lot of self-scouting going on here with Wolverine Confidential as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for our second episode of Wolverine Confidential. We'll be back next Monday. Until then, we'll see you later.